Hello and welcome, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening to those who will be joining us later on. We are here together in this Saturday meeting where we take the time to express ourselves and bring some of the teachings of Spiritism to one another and get together, right? Learn from one another, vibrate to one another. And today, no different, we have Kirsten with us, who will be sharing with us another chapter of the book by Joanna de Angelis, Times of Health and Conscientiousness. And today she will be discussing chapter 16, entitled Serenity. So, who does not need serenity in their lives, right? As we were saying earlier, when we were talking about the topics and the things that we're going to discuss, I said, you know what, I need some serenity in my life. So to connect with the moment, connect with my wishes and the wishes of many of us, I am quite sure not the only one. We would like to read a passage of the book Happy Life, and then we will pray together and then pass the word to Kirsten so she can conduct this amazing work of every Saturday. Joanna de Angelis says, learn the lessons of life, but particularly learn from your own experiences. Do not believe the siren songs that seduce and drag you into the abyss. If the alcoholic wants to free himself from alcoholism, he will easily find someone ready to serve him another drink rather than to give him bread. If the smoker wants to give up tobacco, his friends will laugh at him and try to make him continue poisoning himself. If the addict tries to give up his drug, the drug dealer will threaten and blackmail him. If the criminal of any type attempts to rehabilitate himself, those who will conspire against him will swarm around him. So be careful and keep yourself physically and morally healthy. An amazing reminder for all of us when we are looking for serenity, right? So, on this note, we invite everyone to take a moment to pray. Let us first of all give thanks to our dear Creator to for this moment, for this encounter that we have. Although not physically at our headquarters, we are here conducting this work, sharing ourselves and sharing the moment to enlighten ourselves and to grow. And why not say, dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity of keeping ourselves out of trouble as we pray, as we learn, as we share this moment with one another. Let us pray also for all those spirits that are helping us to change as we put our efforts to become better human beings. Let us also pray for those who do not want us to change. As Joanna de Angelis have mentioned, there are many who want to see us the same way we were before. But let us pray so that with our examples, our changes, they can also change for the better. We thank you, dear Lord, and we ask that you guide the mind and heart of our dear friend Kirsten, who will conduct this meeting tonight, enlightening not only her life, but the life of many, the hearts of many who are in need of serenity in this globe, who we need to be showered with this idea of serenity, with this feeling and the actions that will make this planet more serene and more calm. We're thankful for this opportunity to share this moment with her, with many others, and so be it. So, as we were saying early, another chapter, a continuation of the work, right, Kirsten, of the book Times of
Yes.
Health and Conscientiousness by Joanna de Angelis also, and today, chapter 16, entitled Serenity. Kirsten, please take us away. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leo. And good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And like Leo said, who who doesn't desire, who doesn't want serenity? I don't think that there's a person on this earth that hasn't ever experienced that desire to want to have that. We all want serenity. So today, let's talk about that. And let's talk about it, and we will be talking about the spiritist perspective, the perspective that Joanna brings in this particular chapter. And we're going to talk a very high level overview of how serenity is important to our health, how we define serenity, and how we can obtain and maintain serenity in our day to day lives. Because, yes, it is of absolute importance that we try to strive for that we try to strive for serenity, because ultimately it's good for us and it's good for humanity. But true to all of Joanna's chapters in this first half of the book, she always starts out with positive affirmations. This particular set of affirmations is shorter than usual. That's okay. Doesn't matter. It's straight into the point. So if you will, you can join me in repeating these affirmations. They're very positive, very uplifting, and very centering for us to just really dive into the lesson that Joanna shares with us in this particular chapter. She starts out by saying this, and repeat after me. Divine serenity comes over me after I have fulfilled my duties. I understand my responsibilities in life, and I detach myself from conflicts. Clear-minded, I advance step by step to acquire consciousness, and I harmonize myself, merging with the whole of the work of God. Serene and confident, no evil can touch me. Words have so much power, more power than what we often remember or realize in our day-to-day lives. That inner dialogue that we have with ourselves, it's important for us to be self-aware, because the things that we are telling ourselves, those inner dialogues that we're having within our own minds, is not just us, but can also be the spiritual influences, the spirits around us at that particular time. So if we're feeling like we're in a great mood, we might be having a really positive outlook on life and having very positive inner dialogue, and could be a reflection of the good spirits around us. But the opposite is also true. So something for us to be cognizant of. But how do we define serenity? I mean, we're just going to use a broad, generalized definition that you could find throughout vast different dictionaries, everything from the Oxford English Dictionary to Merriam-Webster. And serenity is defined as the condition or quality of being serene, clearness and calmness, quietness, stillness, and peace, calmness of mind, evenness of temper, an undisturbed state, or coolness. But it's not just a physical, it's not you could look at someone and say, oh, they look cool. They look like they're just even tempered. But it's more than that. It's not just someone looking at us and saying, oh, they're calm, because we can look calm on the outside, but there's a storm raging within us. But serenity is this feeling inside of ourselves. It is something that no one can take from us, no one can shake. It is something that we and we alone can obtain, and no one can take from us. So, we wanted to talk and share a story about how serenity, being serene in our own lives, how that can not only benefit, obviously, myself, of course, those around me, those I'm living with, my family, but also those we are in contact with. And why, especially nowadays, and I feel like we always say that nowadays, but in every generation, in every year, in every human epic, there's always tragedies and traumas and, so many, for lack of a better term, sad things that happen. So at any time in our life, it's always good to be serene. But this particular story I want to share with you today, it's called I've Come to Clean Your Shoes. Now, this story um, is about a family, a woman, husband, and wife, their two children, and they get the sudden news of some really traumatic things that happened within the family, and then someone comes in and very humbly helps shift their outlook on that one particular day. So allow me to read a brief part of this story and we can talk about it. So the story reads like this. Still in shock, I stumbled about the house trying to decide what to put into suitcases. Earlier that evening, I received a call from my hometown in Missouri telling me that my brother, his wife, her sister, and both the sister's children had been killed in a car crash. And my mother said to me, "Come as soon as you can." That's what I wanted to do, to leave at once, to hurry to my parents. But my husband Larry and I were in the midst of packing all of our belongings to move from Ohio to New Mexico. Our house was in total confusion. And she meandered about, not being able to focus on anything after that moment, after she got that phone call, that devastating phone call. So her husband was able to take care of some things, make phone calls, let people know that the obligations that they had that coming week that they wouldn't be attending to because they had to fly out to Missouri. Just taking care of letting close friends and family know what was going on. So in the midst of this woman walking around her house trying to figure things out, she heard the doorbell ring. And when she opened the door, it was a friend, a friend of her and her husband. His name was Emerson King, and he was standing on their porch, on their front porch. And he simply said to her, "Hi, I've come to clean your shoes." She got very confused. So she asked him to repeat himself. "You came to do what?" And he said, "I've come to clean your shoes." Donna, who was his wife, Donna had to stay with the baby, he said. "But we want to help you. I remember when my father died and it took me hours to get the children's shoes clean and shined for the funeral. So that's what I've come to do for you. Give me your shoes, not just your good shoes, but all your shoes." So she proceeded to do that. She gave him all, her and her husband's, the two kids, their shoes. And this man proceeded to uh, lay down paper on their kitchen floor and just diligently, methodically, and humbly clean all the shoes. And this woman who just but maybe 20, 30 minutes earlier got this horrific news about the death of her brother, her sister-in-law's sister, and their children had died in a fatal car crash. Here was this man, this friend of theirs, who came to their house to clean their shoes. But here was she, unable to really focus on any one particular thing because of the devastating news. But she said, "As I watched him, I remembered Jesus. And I remember when Jesus went to clean the feet of the disciples." And she said, "In that moment, I remembered Christ and I remembered his loving humility. And I looked at my friend and I was filled with joy in my heart to have someone just there for us in that moment." So she went on to take care of everything she needed to take care of in her home, get the kids ready for this trip that they are leaving out tomorrow morning. And little by little, she was able to get things done. All the while, their friend just quietly cleaned the shoes. And this was very impactful for her because she realized that that small act enabled her, that small act of her good friend coming in and very serenely coming in with his calmness and his own serenity brought something to her and her family in that moment, in that time of need. Something so small, something we don't even think of, but it's just humbly being of service to another in their time of need. And she ends her story saying this: "Now, whenever I hear of an acquaintance who has lost a loved one, I no longer call with the vague offer, 'If there's anything I can do.' Instead, I try to think of one specific task that suits that person's need, such as washing the family car, taking the dog to the boarding kennel, or house sitting during the funeral. And if the person says to me, "How did you know I needed that done?" I reply simply, "It's because a man once cleaned my shoes." So it's a story for us to think about whether we are the woman who has just received the phone call of the devastating news, or we are that friend who hears of it and immediately says, "I want to be of use. I just want to go and be useful." And that kindness, that serenity that we can indirectly, yet directly, share. So it wasn't that he went over there to preach to her, to say this or that you'll see your loved ones again. He just went into, how can I help in the most humblest of ways, to just be here for my friends who are experiencing uh, a sudden loss. So this is in a way we might not have thought of, how serenity can play a role in our lives today, tomorrow, or any other opportunity that we're given. And don't just think that serenity is just a philosophical topic, that it doesn't have a place anywhere else in our lives. It does. It does in healthcare. We have been looking at how to assist people with their overall health. And one of the things in recent decades is looking at alternative ways to help support patients, if you will, people that are ill or just every day. But specifically, obviously, within healthcare, we're dealing with people that have acute or chronic illnesses and wanting to give them back a better quality of life. So, one of the things that was created in the early 90s, and then early to late 90s, was this Serenity scale. And also, it was created in 91, and then in 96, or rather it was started out as a concept, and then in 96 actually became a tool to be used. So this particular publication that was published in the Journal of Holistic Nursing talks about this particular scale, this brief Serenity scale. So it's the Serenity scale, but a shorter version of it, which just allows clinicians and nurses to be able to utilize it to ensure that patients are, in essence, living their best life. And that would be considered these 10 critical areas of attributes of serenity, which we're not going to go crazy deep into, but just some of those qualities are this inner haven of peace and security, detachment from excessive desires and emotions, and acceptance of situations that cannot be changed. And one of the things, just so we understand a little bit more, I'm going to read to you a quote from the actual publication. As part of their clinical practice, nurses offer patients a number of spiritual interventions such as prayer, meditation, journaling, etc., etc. The desired outcome of these interventions is a state of spiritual well-being, peacefulness, and harmony. So this Serenity scale essentially became a tool where we could measure how these interventions being, offering patients prayer, or speaking to them about their spiritual or religious needs, which basically that is what has it's translated into nowadays, where addressing the needs of anyone that comes through the hospital and that is ill, making sure that not only are they safe, we ask a lot of basic assessment questions, but one of the things that has changed is there anything in regards to your spirituality or religiosity that you wish to be acknowledged or you need support of? Would you like a chaplain or someone to talk to? Or so a lot of providers have been looking at this and utilize this, because we know that there is data that's out there that these alternative interventions, if you will, just giving patients this option has proven to bring people to serenity, has made people more serene, and has enabled them to accept situations that they otherwise perhaps don't really have control over. Especially when we're talking about a chronic illness, they may not, they're just looking at managing it to the best of their ability. And so when you're in that stage, the best thing we could try to do is try to enable patients or people that are going through acute or chronic illnesses to find that inner serenity, because the science is out there. But not just wanting to look at the scientific aspects of it, because we know that there definitely is a need for us to address our own, whether it's our spirituality, whether it's just meditation, whether it's prayer, whether it's just connecting with something divine. We know that it is an internal trip that we have to take, an internal journey, rather, I should say, that each one of us individually can only take for ourselves. But much like the story about cleaning your shoes that we shared earlier in this presentation, we also are always an example for somebody else. And Joanna tells us that in her little book of messages, Happy Life, that no matter what you think or believe, excuse me, how we live our lives, we are always an example to someone, because people are either looking at us, especially nowadays, on social media, things that we post. I apologize for the coughing. We're so visible. And even recently, a friend was telling me a story that she was going to get a massage. And when she was in the waiting area, she actually overheard two women tell this really inspiring story of overcoming some trauma and difficulties. That the friend of mine told me that by the end of this, these two women talking, the whole room was crying. And she said that there just was a sense in the room that the energy just shifted. Like we all just felt like uplifted somehow. Like it was amazing. Like we all felt this solidarity. So it's amazing how much we can affect one another. But Joanna starts out this chapter defining serenity and helping us to understand the following. She says, serenity is the cornerstone of the moral and spiritual constructs of the human being. Without serenity, accomplishments become very difficult. It results from right conduct and an equitable consciousness, both of which provide a realistic view of events and foster the identification of the goals in life worthy of the valuable investments of bodily existence. So without having that serenity in our day-to-day lives, everything feels and is more difficult. When we are able to be serene, to be accepting, not giving up, but accepting of what is, and seeing what you can learn from it and grow with it and still maintain your happiness. That is something to be achieved and worked on. She continues in the following way. She says, in the frantic pursuit of pleasure, cultural treasures, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Cultural treasures are wasted and are made servants of the lower, perturbing passions with negative consequences. The more one enjoys pleasure, the greater the need to experience even more of it in order to renew the sensations that masquerade as emotions. Serenity is a state of concurrence between duty and right. which harmonize for the individual's benefit. With a serene conscience, one can face every situation with poise and never fall apart emotionally. Occurrences, people, and existential phenomena are seen on their true levels of importance and do not become a cause of distress, no matter how bad they may seem. And when she talks about this, almost like a hedonism, it's just this frantic pursuit of pleasure. And the more and more we search it out, the more and more we get stuck in that so-called rat race, or that wheel that mice run on. It just goes and goes and goes and goes, and you just kind of get stuck in this mode of wanting to have those same sensations again. And that is very different from serenity. That is very different how we experience peace, inner peace in our lives. Excuse me for a second. To experience hedonism, this frantic pursuit of pleasure, is not, let's not be mistaken, is not the same as having serenity. Serenity is when we have a balance between our duties and doing what is right, which ultimately helps us in the long run. So it seems beneficial. Why not pursue it? Why don't more people do it? Because pleasures, or to obtain pleasures, comes easily and readily. To obtain serenity, to work at it, it is work. It takes having to really look at ourselves for what we really are, to look at ourselves. Reality. There's a saying, there's nothing but fear itself, because sometimes it's the fear that holds us back. So we get into this mode of always this pursuit of pleasure. And not realizing the larger capacity we have to be and experience so much more joy. There's this quote from this Roman lawyer in the Roman times. His name was Marcus Cicero. And he has this quote. And he says that he talks about, in this quote, he's referring to when in Roman times and the amphitheaters, when there were circuses and horrible things were being done, and there was a lot of hedonism and all that kind of things. So he talks about that. He says following: the evil was not in bread and circuses per se, but in the willingness of the people to sell their free for full bellies, and the excitement, the games, which would serve to distract them from the other human hungers, which bread and circuses can never appease. So we get so wrapped up in this frantic pursuit of pleasures. And it's not that those things in and of itself are bad, but it's the fact that because of when we were in search for those things, we forget about all other things, the needs that we have as immortal spirits, the needs of those around us, those that are suffering, those that are going through hardships. We become blind, and we become truly selfish in every sense of the word. And anytime we go through a hardship, when we are in this materialistic mindset, to go through any struggle is the most difficult thing to experience, because those people tend to not have any serenity within them. So it's a choice. Which do we want? Do we want more serenity in our lives? It seems so much more beneficial. But we also have to have compassion for ourselves, compassion and understanding for others, because we are all at our own level. And sooner or later, we will all reach that understanding. So let us not be impatient with others who are still in the arena watching things that are seemingly materialistic or have no connection with spirituality. Everyone has their time. But if you are listening to this talk now, it means that somewhere inside of you, you are ready. You are not fully distracted. That you are consciously here to change, to be better, and to find serenity in your life. And in the Spirit's book, they give us a really good depiction of this. These two types, I would say two types of people, but also sort of the double-sided coin inside of all of us. Sort of the story of the good, I think it's the good wolf and the bad wolf inside of us. Let me explain. Rather, let's let the Spirit's book explain and we'll discuss. So this comes from observation of question 941. And Kardec shares the following. Carnal individuals, more connected to corporeal life than spiritual life, have on earth only its material pains and pleasures. Their happiness consists in fleeting satisfaction of all their desires, their soul constantly concerned with and affected by the vicissitudes of life, remain anxious and in perpetual torture. And on the flip side, we have moral individuals who have raised themselves above the artificial needs created by the passions, have even in this world pleasures unknown to materialistic persons. The moderation of their desires gives calmness and serenity to their spirit. Let's stop for a second. Excuse me. Let's observe a couple things. One, the dichotomy that exists within all of us, that we have both this carnal tendency, that part of us that in our evolution still remains with us, and then there are parts of us, or a part of us, that is already interested in all things spiritual and moral and good. But sometimes it's like an inner battle we might have with ourselves. But much like the story of, I believe it's called the good wolf and the bad wolf inside of us, those two wolves, it all depends upon who we feed, who we invest in. Are we investing? How are we investing our time, our day to day? That's the best way to tell of how we are feeding ourselves. How we are spending our time. And another thing we want to point out is something here that the spirits bring to us, Kardec brings to us. Pleasures unknown to materialistic persons. Pleasures unknown to materialistic persons. We often think that all of these pleasures that we can experience in this physical world are far and beyond way better than having a spiritual life. When, on the contrary, we know not just through the Spirit's book, but through other publications, one book in particular that Leo has been studying and presenting to us on Saturdays in the same fashion that I have, chapter by chapter, a book by Divaldo Franco and Manuel Firman de Miranda, Name escapes me. Maybe someone could throw it into the chat. But they talk about how on other planets there are emotions that we can't even fathom to feel. Good ones. We experience happiness, love to a degree here on this planet. But there are these emotions, these feelings, these pleasures that even in this world we cannot fathom them yet. We cannot conceptualize them yet. So there's that. And also a friendly reminder that these pleasures we think we're enjoying, or that I have to give up this and that. Let's say, for instance, I have to give up chocolate because chocolate or eating out or fried foods, because it's so yummy, for lack of a better term. It's so delectable. And we think that that is the end all to be all. But in reality, there's a much greater pleasures that pale in comparison. It's something for us to think about. And the spirits, and Kardec ends with this: happy with the good they do, there are no disappointments and vexations. Happy with the good they do, there are no disappointments, and vexations pass lightly over their soul without leaving any painful marks. So, in layman's terms, when we have serenity, when we work on ourselves in trusting of acceptance, on fulfilling our duties and our responsibilities, in layman's terms, we're able to roll with it because we're serene. No matter what comes our way, it's kind of like that story of the ship on the unsettled sea. But if we can be serene, it doesn't matter. We can hold that serenity within ourselves. Nothing else can stir us. Joanna goes on to say more. She says, serene individuals are content because they have overcome attachments and detachments, illusions and desires, maintaining harmony in any situation. Balanced, they are not victims of extremes. They choose the middle path with firm, unwavering determination. Serenity is not an outward quietness or indifference, but wholeness of action, devoid of anxiety or fear, insecurity or haste. In the heat of every battle, in the eloquent lesson of the Beatitudes, or even while being crucified, Jesus maintained his serenity, although differently each time, undeterred and self-assured, with unreserved trust in God. Some of you might say, well, I'm not Jesus. Of course, we are not that level of perfection, but it is something to be strived for. We can attain, we can obtain serenity. Does it mean that nothing in our lives will ever bother us again? No, because we have our good and our bad days. At the level that we're at, we may not be able to hold this or maintain this 100% of the time. There may be parts of us that have already found serenity. And it's an ongoing inner journey within ourselves. And at some point, maybe not even in this lifetime, we will be able to achieve this constant in our lives. We will be able to achieve this level of spirituality and morality and overcome our materialistic, hedonistic ways to understand the importance of connecting with the divine within us and above us, quote unquote. Joanna goes on to give examples of others who famously were faced with horrendous vipers, if you will, but yet maintained their serenity. She says, meditating in Varanasi, he presented his Four Noble Truths, or while being hounded by terrible persecutions by the Brahmins, his fiery enemies, Buddha remained calm, totally surrendered to peace. Preaching that intermediaries between God and humans are unnecessary, or even while being burned at the stake, John Huss remained faithful and serene, knowing that no one could actually end his life. And we've talked about John Huss before, and just as an FYI, the spelling of his name, depending upon where you're at in the country or what country you're in, can be Jan or John. Someone like John Huss or like the Buddha, who revolutionized the society that they lived in at the time for holding ideas that were not commonly held. But they had this serenity that Joanna speaks of. They knew in the depths of their soul that no one could take away that strong faith, that connection with God that they had. No one could bring them fear that did not exist within them. They simply were serene. And here's just a depiction, one of many, many artistic depictions of when John Huss was actually burned at the stake for his ideas, for preaching that there was no intermediary needed between God and humans. Because at the time, priests were seen as intermediaries. Excuse me. And he identified and said, was it necessary to have an intermediary, that we can directly pray to God and have a connection with him? So despite a whole society around him, surrounding him, he did have followers, but by and large, people were against him, much like the Buddha at that time. He maintained his serenity. And if you think about other leaders or other great thinkers who have led troubled lives or have encountered challenges, yet were steady and steadfast in their purpose and what they needed to do. Joanna goes on to say, the martyrs experienced the serenity of their ideal wherever they struggled, and thus were not affected by evil or persecution by the wicked. Serenity also comes from certainty and confidence in what one knows, does, and is. It is a sure anchor rooted in the sea floor, securing the ship of existence, giving it time to be prepared to sail forward. Remember the martyrs, all of the Christians that were fed to the lions, that were burned at the stake. From a spiritist recounting, we are told that these souls, that these people that were burned at the stake, I should say, did so willingly and serenely because they knew that their beliefs were anchored, as Joanna says, and rooted in this sea floor. It was a certainty in their faith and knowing what they knew was right. It's serenity, and this knowingness is not to be misunderstood or not to be misconstrued as when we see others like dictators or societies trying to tell us that this is the way things should be done. When we are truly have that serenity within us, we have no need to try to force other people to believe as we do. Because once we have that assurance within ourselves, there's no need to want to convert others to bring them to our team. However, there is a desire to want to help others, to want to help people to find this happiness, this joy within themselves, and to break the shackles, because ultimately we become shackled to our own negative beliefs that hold us back. These are the things, although it might seem simple, or perhaps it might seem simplistic and unattainable, because we might be experiencing our own inner turmoil. And we're here to say that there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that at the level that we're at, that each one of us, to some degree or not, has had an inner turmoil where we're battling parts of us that want to just throw caution to the wind and lead a hedonistic lifestyle. And then again, like we shared earlier, there's another parts of us that acknowledge and know that it's good to have faith, to work towards acceptance, to work on all the virtues that exist out there in the world. So it's this inner battle. It's good for us to acknowledge what is inside of us. That is why know thyself, we're always reminded of it, but know so little how to achieve it. But it's in part first being able to say to ourselves that we are willing to look at ourselves, to know who we are, and to not be sad and depressed about it or to feel guilty, but to say, look, this is the phase that I'm in, that I've reached, and I wish to be better. I wish to obtain nirvana, if you will. I wish to obtain that inner serenity, that peace, that acceptance of what's going on around me, because it is attainable. It might seem impossible. How can one live a life where they're constantly bombarded with negativity and no one that supports them? It's possible. People have done it. And Jesus said, if I can do this, you can do much more. He wasn't talking about magical thinking. He was talking about the power that lies within each one of us to make the needed changes in our lives. Because we can feel that serenity. And folks, believe it or not, the challenges that we are experiencing, the pain, the dramas and the traumas, although difficult and bring tears to our eyes, if we can struggle through it, walk through it without fearing it, but yet trying to see what I can learn from it, we can come out the other side stronger, better, wiser, kinder, more loving and compassionate. Because once we go through that, much like the woman in the beginning part of this presentation today in the story, who got the call that her brother and sister-in-law and nieces and nephews were killed in a car crash, in a sudden fatal car crash. It jolted her, to say the least. But the point is that you see at the end of her story, at the end of her struggle, she learned through that struggle and through the kindness and a simple act from someone else that she too can endure and be there for somebody else and be a living embodiment of serenity for someone else to help them go through their struggle. It's not about the big and the flashy of coming into someone's life and just fixing everything. It's not about fixing everything for somebody else. It's about helping them, enabling them to endure that hardship. So we seek to find a cure and to get things all better without realizing that there's many lessons to be learned in the pain and the challenges that we go through. That that's the beautiful part of it all. Because that's where we learn, that's where we grow. And that is where we can build our faith and find this serenity. Because once we realize that we can endure, then we can endure anything. Because I have my faith, I have confidence and certainty, and it becomes unwavering. And she ends this chapter in the following way. Takeaways for us, she says, always act with a clear conscience so that you do not fall into conflict and lose your serenity. Love and study yourself. Love and study yourself. Choosing what is best and long lasting for your days, and you will never retreat. However, if you do err, if you do make a mistake, if you do compromise yourself, if you do become regretful, do not be afflicted with guilt. Recompose yourself, correct the mistake, recover and recapture your serenity. Without it, you will hinder your progress by experiencing suffering that you could otherwise avoid. Just as we had shared, it is at the level that we're at, it is inevitable that at some point we may make an error or two. But let's acknowledge it, let's fix it, let's correct it, and regain our serenity. Otherwise, we're going to go through a whole lot of suffering by just ruminating in that guilt. And it won't really serve a purpose other than for us to continue and extend our suffering. And we don't need to. We can acknowledge, correct the mistake, recover and recapture our serenity. And she ends with this final 3-word sentence. Serenity is life. Serenity is everything. Serenity is life. Serenity is everything. And if you meet someone who's gone through enough struggles in their life, 9 times out of 10, they will tell you that all that they want and work towards is just to lead a serene life. That perhaps prior to them going through all their struggles, they may have had many fantasies about obtaining all of these pleasures and wealths and all these things. But now that they've gone through so many struggles and difficulties, they've realized that at the end of all things, they just want to be serene in their heart and in their mind. So, friends, these are the thoughts that we leave you with. We thank you so much for staying with us this whole time, for listening to us. I'm going to try to stop sharing as soon as I can stop it. There we go. So thank you. That is it. And I apologize for the coughing. I don't know where that came from. I don't know.
Your throat needs some serenity too.
My throat needs some serenity. Good. Thank you.
I'm just joking. Well, thank you so much. Despite the difficulties that you found there, hopefully you feel better soon there with the cough. Interesting enough that I also had some right before we started. I don't know if you remember, but things that
Yes.
happen, right? Things that happen to
Yes.
when we were doing this good work and sharing a good message with one another. Amazing topic, and obviously when brought by Joanna de Angelis and by you too, it makes it even more appealing and enjoyable and all the good stuff right above. So it's as we're saying at the beginning, who doesn't need it, right? Who doesn't um, uh, wants to find some serenity, even though we may not be in a position where we can say, I know what I want, but thank God, we have these reminders, right? Serenity and how to achieve it. One thing that I would like to, well, before I go into some of the comments here, and some of the comments that I have, I would just like to acknowledge everyone who is connected with us, who has shared this moment with us. Very quiet group today, but I know they're out there. I just noticed Yasko posed her question. But before we go into those questions and comments, I want to just to connect with something that we read at the beginning, and it's I would like to ask you, although in the same let's say topic or the same struggles that we see in our lives, right? I want to connect two things. I want to connect the one of the paragraphs that says serene individuals are content because they have overcome attachments and detachments, illusions and desires, maintaining harmony in any situation. And I want to connect this with the opening reading. I don't know if you remember, but it's actually towards those who come to us or come against us when we want to change, when we want to do something, right? I don't know if you would like to develop a little bit more, or if you just tell us, Leo, go back to the text. In terms of how do we find serenity when you are at that level that, look, I don't want this in my life anymore, right? But yet, the temptations keep coming back in terms of other people presenting it to us or calling us to that abyss that Joanna de Angelis mentioned in the book Happy Life.
So your question is, how do I remain serene when there are parts of us that feel like we are rebelling against the struggles and the negativity? Because it's like, well, I don't want it.
Well, not only parts of us, but also other people who used to partake, into the events of life, right? Our desires of the past that now keeps coming back to us and offering more, right? Or instigating us.
Oh, so are you asking how do we deal with those that are, although we're trying to get better, but they're
Hmm.
trying to bring us down to the abyss?
Yes.
Okay, so that's your question. I just want to make sure that I understand it.
Hmm.
So, how do we deal with others is the question, right?
Well, we can put that way, yeah.
Well, no, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. How do I deal with others? How do I deal with, because people are bringing these options back into my life,
Hmm.
and it's serving as a temptation for me. So
Hmm.
that could also be, I'm assuming, maybe part of your question. So we have this habit of always externalizing responsibility, of always externalizing and giving power to those outside of us.
Hmm.
But really, the power is within us. And I don't say power in an egotistical way. What I mean by that is we are the ones that choose to. There's a part of us that still wants that. So there's this story of that Chico Xavier used to say, this phrase that temptation is like a dog running after you and you're running away, but yet simultaneously you have this feeling like you just want to be caught by the dog.
Hmm.
So it's like you want to run, but at the same time you want it. So it's this dichotomy of life. So how to manage that? Well, first and foremost, I would say it's not an easy, straightforward answer, because we are all each very complex individuals and very unique in the ways in which we operate. And I truly in my understanding of Spiritism, I truly believe that it never wants to put responsibility on others, but on us for ourselves. And so we need to work on ourselves. That there are parts of us that still, that want to run away and throw things to the wind, to work on those parts of ourselves, to actually befriend those parts of ourselves and see what that part of us needs. Because in psychology, every defense mechanism that it develops within us was developed out of a need to be a part of us to be protected. So that can manifest in very different ways for different people. Sometimes it's a very simple. It's a defense mechanism where someone is just very harsh with others, doesn't allow people to get close to them, or it's a defense mechanism where it could be something more serious or have more of a more serious psychological issues with it. I'm forgetting the term; it's flying out of my brain. But in any event, that being said, it all boils down to me, myself, and I, and obviously bringing God into this equation because having our faith and connecting with this divinity is really important. Um, so it comes down to me being willing to face myself, who I really am, my own desires, what I want, and doing the work. Because if someone is in my life, whether it's voluntarily allowing them in my life, or they're a family. And we don't have much say in that because once you're blood, at least in this lifetime. So what do we do? It's also learning to have healthy boundaries for placing healthy boundaries where you can say, I love this person, but for my own health and well being, I need to have some boundaries set up here. So I don't know if I answered your question entirely, Leo, because it's a very vague question. Great question. Excellent question. I think a lot of people suffer with, but let me know if you want me to.
No, no, this is great. And the idea of bringing responsibility and God as well, right, to the equation, right? I think that helps us to uh, maintain ourselves in this serenity. I think it's the giving power or empowering a situation or a person more than we empower ourselves. It's detrimental to not only ourselves but to others as well, because our, let's say, lack of serenity will cause the lack of serenity or uncertainty or turmoil in the lives of others as well. So no, great way to answer it. Yes, it is in a way, for lack of better terms, an ambiguous, question, very open, that also needs a lot of, we can apply in different ways, and obviously there's no um, perfect answer, because we also have to dive into the details if somebody's going through. But I wanted to make it general, and I think you illustrated really well. Giving continuation to it, to these
Can I
questions.
touch on just something else we have mentioned, Leo? I know we have
Sure.
some other.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to say that because we talk when you were mentioning this, it made me think of something that when you say talking about how we can be serene or not serene and how it can affect others within a family dynamic. Unknowingly, we can have parents that behave in such a way that they might profess a particular faith or not, but
Hmm.
they have certain behaviors and attitudes that we learn, and we learn to have that kind
Hmm.
of behavior. So let's say, for instance, you have a mother and father, or a mother or just a father, and either of them are very anxious people, or they're not very serene. They lack serenity. So
Hmm.
something we have to realize is that that's passed down through generation to generation. This behavior that becomes so unconscious, so it becomes even more. That's why I say we are complex beings. So it's not just about working on ourselves, just me, myself, and I, but all the baggage that I brought, not just from past lives, but this life in and of itself. And Joanna has another book called Family Constellations, where she talks about this, that how we can carry the guilt that our parents unintentionally or intentionally placed on us, and it's something
Mhm.
that we have to work through. I just wanted to add that in there, to add in another ingredient to make our life, to make things even more complicated. That we are just really complex.
Not at all. No, not complicating at all. I think it's also a reminder that Joanna de Angelis mentions this after towards the end of the chapter, right? In terms of guilt, in terms of our evolutionary path, right? Whether we acknowledge or not, the different lives, right? When we start going to that route, it gets even, I don't want to say worse, but in a way complicated, because but also helpful, because we tend to punish ourselves, right? Of not being
Hmm.
serene or of not finding serenity. Wait a minute, we're coming now to the alert of, okay, I want to be serene. As we said earlier, sometimes it even escapes the idea of what is serenity, right? We don't know if there is such a thing in life, right? Because of all the craziness that's going on. So step by step, and it takes time. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Daniel, then I'm going to ask Daniel to put the questions on the screen, because for some reason it's not allowing me. He asked, sometimes the cause of imbalance is not the outside, but inside of ourselves. How to achieve serenity on these situations?
I'm just rereading your question, Daniel.
Mhm.
So the cause of imbalance is always within us. Are there individuals that act in balance, which would qualify that as being outside? Of course. But the imbalance that we experience comes from us and us alone. We can get triggered by others. There could be triggers in life in general. And that's why oftentimes we are inclined to say, well, this person made me feel this way. But it's a fallacy. It's a misunderstanding of how things really work. Imbalances inside of ourselves. And how do we achieve that serenity? Facing first and foremost who we are, not being fearful to look at ourselves and say, what's going on with me? What is happening inside of me? Why am I feeling this way? And how can I learn and grow from this?
Mhm.
But it's something that we do not do enough. We don't live in a society that necessarily promotes that, quite the contrary. And it's even worse, I think, for uh, for men, because it's often seen as, I don't know, feminine perhaps, but I like to think that a lot of that is changing. Um, so hopefully it is. So achieving serenity is a lifelong journey, because there's so many obstacles and so many things to be overcome and experienced.
Thank you, Kirsten. And then Yasko, she is asking, great talk, Kirsten. We think we can or are able to, way beyond our capabilities. An example, fix the situation, relationship, people. This may be the root of our inner imbalance, lack of serenity. How to learn to rationally say or admit our helplessness in most of these situations, and delegate to our higher power, high power, or higher power.
I think it kind of talks to, or this speaks to a little bit what Daniel had kind of asked, or my answer would be sort of similar. You know, being transparent with our own self, being honest with ourselves, admitting that when we feel helpless, admitting that, because oftentimes that in and of itself, to be vulnerable, we don't know how to do that. We don't know, because that would be a sign of weakness. And in the animal kingdom that we've been evolving through, that is what kept us alive. Maintaining our strength and showing strength is what's kept us alive. But now, at the level that we're at, that doesn't serve us anymore. But what can and does serve us is being able to embrace our own vulnerability, not being afraid to be transparent with who we are, how we feel, and to say, I'm struggling with this. I would like to be better. God, please help me. The mere act of asking for help from our divine creator, whichever, whoever we refer to it as, that mere act is that first step. It's opening up the door for us. But it is not an external behavior. It is entirely an internal movement that has to happen. And you know it when you experience it because there's a shift within you. It's a shift. And oftentimes, this shift comes with the help of someone else. It can come with the help of a therapist or a life coach or someone else who's specialized in these areas. Because when we have a problem with our heart, we go to the cardiologist. When we have stomach problems, we go to the gastroenterologist. When we have, problems in our ear, nose, and throat, we see a specialist. So why not, when we are having internal issues, do we also not see someone that is specialized in that area? Now, there's many different specialties. There's many different dynamic ways to find this internal healing. You just have to find what works best for you. And sometimes it is just that beginning of that prayer and say, I want to be better. Let me work on myself. Let me be honest with myself of how I really feel, what I'm feeling. But oftentimes it's really helpful to have an external person, not necessarily a family member, but maybe someone that like a professional. It's very helpful, or it can be. So I'm rereading your question, Yasko, how to learn to rationally say or admit. Yeah. Yeah, it's just being willing to admit it. Because to do it, it's not theoretically it's not difficult. But to be able to admit our weaknesses, that takes a level of strength that we have to find within us.
Thank you, Kirsten. In a way, right, it's that attachment that we have to the power, right? And then when we have to detach ourselves from that power because we see how vulnerable we are, we see how, in a nice way, small we are, and that, that shift causes this imbalance, right? So
Yeah.
it's best to, I think that, with this question you asked, we thank you for it. It reminds us of our of get real with ourselves and say, look, I cannot do this, right? I don't think I can handle this by myself, right? And then look for help, and then really connect, just open up. um, and I think no wonder Joanna de Angelis also reminds us of John saying, there is no connection, there's no intermediary, right? We can connect with God straight through. I think you're going to say something, Kirsten.
Yeah. As you're talking, it got me thinking the wheels of my brain are moving. And I was thinking that, you know, that voicing, that as Yasko said, to our helplessness, our quote unquote helplessness, is showing vulnerability. And it's oftentimes not something we want to share with our partner or close friends or family members because we feel like we're sort of putting our defenses down and being open to being hurt. And the paradox in that is that when we are able to show vulnerability, not just, to ourselves, when having an actual conversation within ourselves, but when we're actually able to share that vulnerability with others that we are close with, it's you might think, well, that person's going to take advantage of me. It's quite the opposite. When we become vulnerable, most times the other person sees a side of us that they didn't know before, and they unknowingly or knowingly become influenced by that to also want to be vulnerable. So it becomes like this, and I think it has a lot to do with um, you know, uh, energies and vibrations and how we're shifting the energy, where it's less ego and it's more about, I'm this immortal spirit, and I'm trying. I'm trying to do my best. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's something I've come to learn on a personal level that I found quite transformative. So I wanted
Yeah,
to share that.
it is. Everything has its own time, right? Everything has um, the right moments and the right conditions. Our hearts, our minds, the way we connect with the environment as well. Because sometimes we do feel that it's not the appropriate time. It's not the appropriate environment for us to open up and show our vulnerability, right? That doesn't mean we're not gonna um, feel things or say things, right, or kind of be in a way of lack of serenity. But again, I mean, everything has its own time, and I think it takes this determination of finding what is inside of us to say, you know what, enough is enough. I need a moment for myself. So I need this transformation, right? I need to change and find serenity, right? um, One final question here from Fabiola. Could you point out the relationship between serenity and the inner sense of fulfillment of our duties towards ourselves and others, or external part? Great talk. Thank you.
Could you point out the relation between rereading it,
Mm-hmm.
serenity, and so the first part of your question, could you point out the relationship between serenity and the inner sense of fulfillment of our duties towards ourselves and others? I'm not sure I understand or external part, but I'll answer the first part that I understood. There's a direct correlation, and this is purely, I would say, experiential, if that's a word. When you experience this, you know it. That when you do what you are supposed to do, when you fulfill your duties, when you fulfill your commitments, when you do what is right, we have a sense of serenity. And we may not know otherwise because maybe that's in this life, that's all that we've ever done. But let me tell you, those who do not do what is right, who do not fulfill their duties or stand by their commitments, they do not have serenity. They may seem like they do. They may seem like they're enjoying their life. They post wonderful photos on Instagram and Facebook, and it all seems hunky dory, as they say. But that's not the truth. So, not sure about when you say or others or the external part. Um, Not sure about that one. But Fabiola, we can always talk offline as well about that. So, but
Very
yes,
well.
serenity and inner sense of fulfillment, it's directly correlated. We gain serenity because of that. Serenity is sort of a consequence of when we're doing the right thing, if you will.
Very well put, Kirsten. I would like to. It's 6:18 now in our time. It could be different times in different parts of the world, but I would like to give you the appropriate time to say your final words and then lead us into our final prayer so we can bid one another farewell and until we meet again on our coming Saturday. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo. I think the final thing I wanted to share is something that I believe it was Givaldo had said before, or maybe it was Chico Xavier, the Brazilian spiritist medium, or Divaldo Franco, the Brazilian spiritist medium, for those who might not be familiar. But one of those great minds, says something to the effect of, I wish for people to have many struggles and many challenges in life because at the level that we're at, having those struggles and those challenges forces us to make a decision, forces us to say, I want to do what's right. I want to get through this and to try to find serenity. But when things are going well, when things are great, when things are we have no troubles at all, we have more of a tendency to fall back on our vices. So if I could say anything, is that although it seems completely contradictory but it is entirely possible to be serene amidst the storm. It absolutely is. You can find that peace by connecting with God, by doing always your best, and having self-acceptance, accepting yourself, being the mother or the father to yourself that you never had, and expressing that love to yourself. You will find that acceptance, that you will realize you don't need that acceptance from other people, but you have it from the Almighty Creator, Father God, and you find that serenity and that peace. And I wish that for everyone. So those are my final thoughts. Leo, I'll turn it over to you for our final moments of prayer.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for connecting with us and allowing us to share and come to your heart, to your home, to our minds, all together collectively. To share something new or perhaps repetitive, that as a reminder only, but that is good for our humanity, our progress here on Earth. On that note, let us give thanks to our dear Creator by saying, Dear Mother, Father God, we're thankful for the opportunity that we had to study, to pray, to share a moment of calmness, to learn about serenity. May this feeling, this wish, if that is still a wish, come towards us. Let us allow ourselves to get to know ourselves, our struggles, so that we can make decisions, change our environment so that we feel serene. And we also wish to bring this feeling, this state of mind and heart to the life of others, so that they perhaps can also feel joyful, happy, everything that comes after this serenity. Reminding ourselves of our responsibility with one another to grow and to multiply life. The responsibility of giving ourselves the right powers and giving the external whatever is needed for them to go, grow, but not allowing them to dictate our lives and to live our lives in a way otherwise than what we study and wish for ourselves and others. We thank you, dear Lord, and so be it.